for the Regional Pest Management Plan Review. On Zoom, we've got, who's that? Can't see that small writing. Oh, Cynthia. Hello, Cynthia. So Cynthia's on Zoom. Right, thank you. I'll ask Councillor Sanson to do the opening karakia for our meeting.
Kia ora koutou. Tuia ki runga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki roto, tuia ki waho. Tuia tātou te tangata, ki te kaupapa o te hui nei, ki te kaupapa o te rangi nei, Māori ora ki a tātou katoa. And the English translation of that is bind above, bind below, bind within, bind beyond, bind us the people to the purpose of our meeting, to the purpose of this day, breathe life into all of us. Kia ora.
Oh, thank you for that. So just a wee housekeeping, running over housekeeping. Just to remind members on Zoom or to presenters on Zoom that the meeting is being recorded and you must mute your microphone unless you are speaking. Just when you're not speaking, if you can turn off your camera during breaks. Thank you. So as far as the meeting goes, the toilets are outside, fire exits, and the media are present. I see Catherine Hubbard is up there on Zoom. Thank you. Now we've got no apologies. I think Matthew Benj is going to attend by Zoom. He's not quite here yet. So moving on to the last minutes, is somebody willing to move the confirmation of the minutes of the Regional Pest Management Joint Committee meeting held on Friday the 8th of December, to move those as a true and correct record of the meeting?
I'm happy to move.
Thank you. Seconder? Thank you. Councillor Bryant. Okay, all those in favour?
Aye.
Thank you. So now we move on to the hearings, and we're starting off with Gillian Bishop. Yes, thank you. Now you have 10 minutes, and if you want to leave time for questions, you need to actually leave time within your 10 minutes, and we'll have, oh, have you got the little bell? We'll give you a little bell when it comes to nearly 10 minutes, just so that you're right. We'll go. All right, good. Okay, thanks. What, 8 minutes? Yes. Yeah, 8 minutes. Thanks, Gillian. And also, we've read your submission. That's the other thing you need to know. So you're speaking to your submission.
Yeah, great. Tēnā koutou, katoa, ko Gillian Bishop, whakaunua. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to our submission. Although I'm chair of Tasman Environmental Trust, today I'm wearing the hat of Waimea Inlet Forum. And I thought I'd just start by explaining the difference between Waimea Inlet Forum and the Waimea Inlet Coordinating Group. So Waimea Inlet Forum is a community group which was formed in 2010 to represent anybody with an interest in the future of Waimea Inlet. And it was to share information with the public and for the public people to have an opportunity to have a say. And over the years, we've made probably close to 100 submissions now. It's a very active group and well supported by the people who attend. The Waimea Inlet Coordinating Group is a group that meets quarterly. It comprises the councils, DOC, Tasman Environmental Trust, Waimea Inlet Forum, and Tasman Bay Guardians, and iwi. That's the group that developed the Waimea Inlet Strategy and Action Plan. So I just thought I'd clarify that for a start. I'm with the Waimea Inlet Forum today. And as part of our discussions with councils, we have been active in trapping around Waimea Inlet and making submissions on cat and dog control. So we've got about 1,100 DOC 200 traps around the inlet, and thousands of trees, native plants put in the ground in terms of habitat restoration. The habitat restoration started in 2014. Every Sunday, it started just last Sunday. There are about 50 volunteers turn up regularly to the planting days every Sunday around the Waimea Inlet. So we're making big changes around the Waimea Inlet, and that was evidenced when we did a recent fernbird survey. And in the last 4 years, it seems like a small increase, but it's a significant increase. Fernbirds 4 years ago, there was only 1. Now there are 9. It's a marvellous increase, and the same with banded rail. With the banded rail surveys, there are more banded rail seen in more places. However, if you look at what's happening around the Waimea Inlet, there is a huge number of houses going up around the Waimea Inlet. And houses bring cats, and not all cats are well contained. And we're very worried about the impact of the cats on our wildlife. So in our we have some areas in the previous iteration of the plan that were designated as areas in which feral cats could be controlled. We do request that those areas be increased. I know it's probably not quite in line with what the partial review of the regional pest management plan, but hopefully you'll consider it. And our submission describes those areas in which we have identified the high biodiversity areas. We do need to keep the feral cats under control in those areas, and you know, we ask for your cooperation. Bell Island's an interesting one. We know that the sandbank off Bell Island is a particularly significant area for roosting migratory birds, and we know that there are a lot of cats, feral cats, on Bell Island. There have been trapping efforts in the past, but it would be good to increase that effort, and also in some other areas. When our chipping programs are conducted, we do identify whether cats are microchipped, and we do have a good process of informing the community so that people know when trapping is occurring in their area. So there is minimal risk, I would say no risk, of any pet cat being involved in any trapping program. Thank you.
Thank you, Gillian. Now we've got, how are we going for time? 6 minutes, so you don't have to use all your time.
I-
But looks like we've got 3 questions, so Councillor Sansom.
Thanks, Celia, through the chair. Kia ora, Gillian. Thanks very much for your submission, both your written and oral one. In terms of the area, the proposed extension, I just wanted to find out really whether there's going to be cost impact for council. And so the trapping, is that undertaken voluntarily? So it's unpaid or?
In the past, our trapping has been through resources that Tasman Environmental Trust has identified.
Okay.
I'm not sure whether TDC or councils have been involved. I'm not, that close to the program, but I think and volunteers are involved.
But the kind of, I guess, the substantive intention of your submission is to extend the area, but not kind of really expecting TDC to contribute additional financial resources to manage that.
No.
Are you kind of, I guess, proposing that the volunteer, that the community would take that on?
Once the areas are identified or confirmed, then the TET can go about looking for resources to fund the program and identifying people to. So it's like step 1 of the activities that need to take place.
Okay, thanks very much.
Grant, for you, my question's in 2 parts, just to follow on from Council Sansom. So the area that you'd like added in, how much area would that add? Was that like half again, 50% more? If you include Bell Island, or have you got any sort of handle on that figure?
Probably if we include Bell Island, it probably doubles it.
Right. So, and secondly, just with Bell Island, is that a new issue or has that been ongoing?
Been ongoing. I know Birds New Zealand used to do some trapping out there, in discussion with NRSBU. And I know that NRSBU has contractors that work out there. But we just wanted it formally recognised as an area where feral cats needed to be controlled.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. We're up to our 10 minutes, so would you like to just do your question later?
No,
Oh, hang on.
Councillor Sansom already asked a question on my behalf.
It sounds good. All right, thank you. Thank you, Gillian, very much. So now we move on to Elaine Asquith on behalf of Tasman Environment Trust. So you have 10 minutes. We'll ring the bell at 8, and if you leave enough time, there will be for questions. Thanks, Elaine. Just turn your microphone on. But no, you just press the little button there. There we go. And then people can hear you on Zoom.
Okay, sorry. Kia ora koutou, ko Elaine toku ingoa, Elaine Asquith toku ingoa. I'm predator-free activator with Tasman Environmental Trust. I'm here speaking to the submission that was put in by Sky Davies. So yeah, essentially we're supporting that all companion animals must be microchipped, desexed, and the number of cats limited per house by a certain time, some year coming up, not too far away, we would hope. And supporting measures to limit the presence of cats in important wildlife areas. We've already got areas marked, as Gillian said, around the Waimea Inlet, which would be great to expand. And also Farmers for FIO in the Mutaweka catchment for areas there to be added to this plan. There's already an extensive trapping program going on there, a volunteer trapping program through TET called Farmers for FIO. It borders Kahurangi National Park and includes subcatchments of the Baton, the Pierce, the Graham and Pokororo rivers. as there's already extensive trapping of stoats and ferrets in these areas, to create safe habitat for Theo, you'd also want to be looking at cats as they're extending. In particular, unowned cats, which we would hope in time will be just an unmicrochipped cat. And also, and we're also aware of some stray cat colonies, and we'd like to have those controlled. So again, that would go back to the number of cats allowed in any household. Also Onitahua, which we didn't name in the submission, but just like to add that. There's a large restoration project going on out in Farewell Spit, and that will be another area because it's a lot of shore nesting birds or migratory birds that will be impacted by cats. And I'd just like to add that we've had an event recently with lots of support, with interesting conversations around cat management, and in particular Helen Buffa from Helen Blackie from Buffamiscal spoke actually to new AI that's coming online, which can actually identify a cat and a cat microchipped or unmicrochipped. So it really lends power to the idea that if every companion animal is microchipped, we've actually got a real tangible way that we could deal with this without having to go with nets and the checking for microchips and whatnot. It is coming online, so those predator-free 2050 steps could actually be married to this really nicely and do great things for our region. And just a lot of groups are coming to me complaining that they've got no way of dealing with cats. Sometimes they're in peri-rural areas as well. They're just not sure what to do because of the situation the way it is at the moment. So the chipped cat would really make a massive difference to those groups who are trying to protect penguins and Theo and whatnot, who are very susceptible to cats. And I think that's all I've really got to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions? Councillor Saxon?
I'm happy to go second. Don't want to always take the questions. I'll go second.
Thank you, so kind. Thanks for coming along today.
Thank you.
Cool. Reading in your submission, you talk about the farmers for Waiho.
Theo is
Theo.
blue duck, the native species. Yep.
Is the staff aware of this group and we contacting them? I've got a thumbs up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Sampson?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm just wondering if the Motueka catchment that's being proposed for inclusion, if there's a really clear map of that, and if the staff have that information, has it been provided to officers?
Which
So the farmers for Theo,
yeah,
in the Motueka catchment, you're talking about an area there that you'd like included.
okay, gotcha. Is there a map included?
Clear map of that?
We could certainly provide a very clear map of that, yeah. And Onitahua as well, which is the sand spit in Golden Bay.
Yeah. So I think if
we could provide those
you
maps.
could provide a really clear map to officers for those particular areas, that would be helpful. Thanks so much.
No problem. Thank you. Thanks for the feedback.
I have this time, just follow on, Elaine. So in that catchment you're talking about, is that generally all of the people that have land in that area that are farmers for Theo? Or?
I'm not 100%. It's a lot of lifestyle block. It backs up onto the national park, so I'm not sure where the lines are drawn. I don't have enough depth of dealing with ins and outs of it. But there's definitely a lot of private land up there in native bush that backs straight onto Kahurangi National Park. So it kind of like goes with Friends of Flora kind of.
And I guess that's some of the challenge around these cats, and they go back into the park just like possums do.
Yeah.
Because they move around so much.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very mobile.
But I suspect that the Motueka catchment collective would be supportive.
I would imagine so. I mean, obviously it's a very it's a contentious issue, so I can't speak for all of them, but I'll certainly speak for TET. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've just got one question, which is, are you aware that concurrent with this process we're doing at the moment, which is actually under the Biosecurity Act, that Tasman District Council anyway is investigating a cat bylaw.
Yeah.
So a lot of these concerns will actually come under the umbrella of the cat bylaw as opposed to this more restricted process for this regional pest management plan that is under the other legislation.
Yes, yeah, we're aware of that as well, but yeah, belt and braces, yeah.
Yes, councillor Stallard.
Thank you. And thanks, Elaine, for giving your time this morning. It sounds like this Farmers for Fio group is a formally established group. Would that group have resources to, if these areas were to be included in the plan, would they have the resources to assist in the efforts to control the cats?
Again, if this was in place, the funding could be sought to, yeah, it's the same as, it's a volunteer group run by TET. There's a pay coordinator, but any new funds are always sought when a new line of trapping is put in place. Mm-hmm.
Yes, we've still got time for another question.
Just one supplementary following on from Councillor Stallard's. In terms of funding for, I guess this would be predator-free kind of initiative. Do you seek, I guess, external non-council funding for that? Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks.
Oh, well, thank you. If that's all, then thank you, Elaine.
You're up. Thank you.
So our next submitter is on Zoom, and that is Cynthia McConville on behalf of Forest and Bird Golden Bay. Are you there, Cynthia? Can you hear us?
Yes, I've just unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Welcome. Okay. So we will sound the bell at 8 minutes, and you've got 10 minutes. If you go less than that, there will be time for questions.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity. I want to expand on the section of our submission that asks for Forest and Bird's Three Rivers project area to be made a site-led project in the Regional Pest Management Plan. And I'm speaking on behalf of the shorebirds, the seabirds, marine mammals, raptors, and wetland birds that use our project area. There are 35 native species present within the site. 24 are shorebirds and seabirds, 6 are wetland birds, 3 are marine mammals, and 2 are raptors. They rely on a range of habitats within the Three Rivers site for key aspects of their life: migration, a food source, sleeping, and raising their young. These habitats have designations of international, regional, and national importance. They support wildlife species whose conservation status ranges from declining to nationally critical. Forest and Bird draw a comparison between the Three Rivers site and the Tasman District Council's site-led program in the Waimea Estuary. We undertake intensive pest control along the coastline with community-led trapping programs at Onaho, Rangihaiata, Waitapu and Rototai, and we're currently investing $25,000 to eradicate pest plants within the Three Rivers site. Our work there is supported by the Department of Conservation and Mana Whena Kimohua. So today we're asking you to recognise the significance of the Three Rivers project area and recommend its inclusion in the Tasman Regional Pest Management Plan as a site-led project. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Are there any questions? Councillor Stallard.
Thank you, through the chair. Thanks for your submission. I wonder if this area is designated a site-led project, what kind of measures are to be included? And for example, is it just control of feral and stray cats, or is there other aspects that are already part of the project?
Well, yes, everything's part of the project with the exception of cats, yes. So we care for the weeds, habitat restoration, eradication of weeds there, and a trapping program for mustelids and hedgehogs are a bycatch, thank goodness, because they're probably the most important predator for shorebirds. They'll nudge their way under birds sitting on eggs. They'll take chicks as well.
Thank you. Councillor Sansom.
Thanks, through the Chair. Kia ora, Cynthia. So just to clarify, what after hearing your response to Councillor Stella, the focus really of your submission, oral and written, is really about the inclusion of the Three Rivers project for feral cat control. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct. Yes.
Okay. And would it then be the case, like with our previous submitter, that if that was included, you would be able to apply for external funding, like non-council funding, to support that work?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you, Cynthia. If there's no more questions, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Another question. Sorry, we've so is Sue Lindsay here? Oh, welcome, Sue. So welcome. You've got 10 minutes. The bell will ring at 8 and you'll leave time for questions.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Sue Lindsay. Thank you for allowing me to come and speak today. I'm want to speak about the feral cat issue, and that, of course, naturally morphs into domestic cat and regulation. But rather than focus on the destruction of our birds and invertebrates by the feral cats and domestic cats, I want to talk about toxoplasmosis, which I have personal experience of, and the devastation that is causing and how widespread it is in our environment and in our community. And on this one issue alone, I believe the control of feral cats is absolutely essential. It's beyond even questioning. So from my perspective, toxoplasmosis manifested itself in my body when I was 15, and it was apparently my mother, when she was pregnant with me, must have been gardening or ingested an egg, you know, that of this disease, and it travelled it crosses over through into the fetus, through the placenta. And we know this from a lot of the farmers that are having problems now with their lambs, their flocks being decimated. And if it doesn't cause miscarriage or abortion or stillbirth, which are very high implications depending on the trimester that it's ingested, it will often cause blindness and other brain neurological abnormalities. With me, it manifested at 15 when the little worm popped up in my eye, and my eye was hemorrhaging and I was heading towards blindness. And that was nearly 50 years ago, and even then it was recognised immediately by the doctors and opticians. So this is a very long-standing problem in our community. New Zealand was the first country to develop a vaccine against toxoplasmosis, for the farming community. It's not 100% effective, depending on the burden of disease in the animals, but is the only thing that we have. And in many countries of the world, pregnant women are tested for toxoplasmosis. In New Zealand, I don't know if you got the information, but I forwarded Department of Conservation report. It's an executive summary on the effects of toxoplasmosis on New Zealand wildlife, but it also mentions several salient points. One is that the incidence in the general population in New Zealand when was tested in Waikato was about 42% of blood samples of people. It is very high. Now, we know that the only the cat species, including the domestic cat, are the only known definitive host of toxoplasmosis, the only host. So New Zealand has no native domestic cat species. So the incidence in New Zealand is totally 100% from domestic cats. And whether they are in your home or on a farm or in the bush, these are the hosts for this disease. And what happens is that and I'll also forward you a document from Cleveland Clinic, an overview of toxoplasmosis and its life cycle. So the cats transmit this, especially kittens, through their feces. The eggs are in the feces. They last for very long periods of time. They are in aquatic environments, terrestrial environments, and sewerage ponds. And then they are flushed out to sea, and in the marine environment, we now have dolphins, especially Hector's and Maui dolphins with toxoplasmosis. We have ponds on farms in New Zealand with toxoplasmosis. Probably our sewerage ponds have toxoplasmosis because the treatment doesn't kill the eggs. So it'll be on the grass, on the parks where cats are, and properties where cats are, and neighbours' properties where cats are who don't have cats themselves. And in my situation, fully fenced property, ground up to 1.5 metres. Cats can't get in unless they jump from neighbours or over gates, and we still have cat feces in our garden. And what can you do? How much money do we spend on chili flakes or getting coffee grounds and spreading them on the ground? What do? You can't, and people just say, oh, but cats should be allowed to wander. And then our dogs will eat the feces, the children play in the gardens. You know, what can you do? So for me, this is a really big issue, and I really would like to see some local authorities, such as yourselves or the government, actually have the guts to draw a line in the sand and say we have to do something about the issue of cats. One is the feral cats, which is a no-brainer because of the destruction they do with our bird life and invertebrates. And then you've got this little hidden issue as well. The other is the domestic cats, which are not confined to people's properties. So they're doing damage to other people's health as well as the bird life. I'd just like to mention here that in this DOC report that most New Zealand native bird and mammal species have not been screened for toxoplasma infection. And we only have a basic understanding of what it's doing to our conservation. you know, our conservation estate. But the control of feral cats is an additional management tool for reducing the incidence of this disease in our environment that is terrestrial and aquatic. Yeah, so I can't emphasize enough how important this is, and I really hope that some authority will take it and actually run with it and just say, look, you know, it's time for a stop to allowing our cats to have the free range, if you like, that they have at the moment. On the issue, I don't know if it's already been mentioned, but when I looked at the statistics for cats and their this predation on birds, in Canada, the UK and Australia, cats kill about 1 million birds a day, 1 million birds. In New Zealand, if we look at our population as a percentage of that, about 200,000 birds a day are killed by cats. And that's not your lizards and your frogs and anything else. So, yes, my plea is for you please to do something about feral cats and bring in, for domestic cats, registration, microchipping, and a toxoplasmosis vaccination for every domestic cat. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you're about at 10 minutes now. So thank you for your interesting presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Sue. Now, is Elizabeth Bryant here, or is she going to be on Zoom? No. Okay, so we don't actually have, haven't got the next presenter until 10:45. So we've actually got 35 minutes. So we will take a break. But if Elizabeth or John Longden appear, then we could start earlier. But John is booked for 10:45. So we'll have a break now. Did you want to ask a question of Sue or just generally now?
Just a general. That last presentation talked about the toxoplasmosis vaccination. I wasn't aware that there was a vaccination for it. What does the team think about that being a requirement, or is that a step too far?
Does anyone know anything about vaccination? I have not heard of such a thing either.
I was just frantically Googling it. So there is a vaccination, but it seems a bit mixed about how effective it is. So yeah, a bit more research required, and we will do that.
And maybe something that would be more relevant to the cat management bylaw, because I think the goal would be eradicate feral cats and then care for companion cats. So maybe we can park up for that. That's a good question.
Thank you. So PJ, is it? Yeah. Are you, we can hear your submission now if you're available for that.
Is it here?
Yes. So we have 10 minutes and we'll ring the bell at 8 minutes. And if you try and keep less than 10 minutes, then we will have time for some questions.
Understood.
It's all yours.
Okay, very good. I understand from the instructions that you have read my written submission. I would just like to emphasize a couple of points and then allow you time for questions. I'm a secretary of the local farm forestry branch, and I sent out a questionnaire. Does anyone have anything to say about this? Eric Appleton made quite a nice response. I have it here, but I'll refer to it. Specifically, he says, and I read from other sources that that they have a Douglas fir that can be ready within a year, a sterile Douglas fir. If there's law change that allows genetic modification. There's also a radiata hybrid, although it's not, it looks like a radiata, so it may not pass the public perception of good practice. However, it has a closed cone and doesn't spread. That is under development right now. Other species that are being promoted for similar uses on farms and small holdings are being promoted: cypresses, sequoias, poplar, and eucalypts. And there are a promotional bunch of field days around the country by Farm Forestry and the Forest Service, Tierra Arauco, promoting these alternative species. Alternative mainly being to radiata and Douglas. The point here that I'd like to make, and Eric made it in his email to me, that it's recognized that it's a problem, and a lot of people are working on it and have been working on it. The government's putting money in via Tierra Arauco. These are been put on by local farm forestry branches. They've been well attended. We had 50 or 60 people here. The growers here in this area in particular have almost completely abandoned Douglas fir for its problematical characteristics. But as radiata is a rather minor spreader compared to Douglas, at least in our area. There's a major problem for growers, foresters, and farmers in that the change of government and the two opinions of the two governments that we've had in the last period of time have not settled well on an ETS system that practically speaking works. It's created ire and disconfidence or lack of confidence in forestry. So I think that doing a major law change, which is major to a lot of people at this time when there's so much in flux, is not really a practical thing. I spoke with a local farmer, 88 Valley, a man who runs Ian Parks. He said I could mention his name. He said he's never had problems. Now, he doesn't have a Douglas fir problem because he doesn't have neighbors with Douglas fir, but he has probably 25, 30 kilometers of boundary fencing with TDC Forestry and Tasman Forest. He said he's never had any problem with radiata, and there is basically no Douglas problem in that whole catchment, at least in the 88 Valley catchment. One of our members was very concerned in that he was growing Douglas and had two neighbors, and he was concerned that it would sneak into their properties, and he's sneaking into their properties to see if it's moving there. So the provision, or one of the laws changes that would make a grower responsible for what's going on another person's property as a possibility for creating all sorts of problems. I also mentioned in my initial submission, a written submission, that the activity in the rural areas, in my opinion, is the best now. The attitude of cooperation is probably the best it has been in my whole time. This covers the main mover behind this, I think, is this catchment board group concept. There are now enough people that have small holders that have moved into areas and been stable there for a long enough time to appreciate what local old people or farmers or have been promoting in the way of river control, weed control, catchment control. I think that the amount of money that's being thrown at it and the people and the interest has brought people together. And I don't think creating laws and rules that would be divisive among, if you want to call them troublemakers or people who aren't willing to talk to their neighbor, basically, will be unhelpful at this time. That's the crux of what I have to say. Do you have any questions?
Thank you very much, PJ. And so are there we have got time for questions.
If I may, Madam Chair, PJ, I think you probably see it in the reverse. We see, as I read it, correct me if I'm wrong, staff, that the forestry company will be responsible if one of the indicated trees appears on a neighbouring small block, not the other way around. But am I reading that right? Someone want to give me a thumbs up? Yeah.
Well, that I understand what you're saying, and yes, however, by making a law that affects everyone that's not forestry, farming, I'm saying, small block holders, it's restricting them from an option to grow a tree that is useful to them, that they don't have to transport, that in the case of Douglas, doesn't have to be treated, very useful and untreated. Radiata for posts and things, they can cut them themselves, mill them themselves, perhaps ship them off for treatment. But my point is that you're putting a restriction on all these people and what they can grow. The incoming seed or incursion from forestry companies is, I'm saying, not critical. I have 3 neighbors who grow trees and I have no problems. When I referred to Ian Parks, he said, yeah, they probably come in, but we spray them. We have other problems. We've got all these other noxious weeds that we're dealing with. Radiata is almost nothing, and Douglas is nothing at all. So what I'm saying is that using a big hammer I just don't think it'll be helpful. And there's so much cooperation going on now that to throw in something like this that could cause a lot of it would be media hype, and that I don't think is helpful. I think it's better to have.
Just if I could follow that on a little bit, Madam Chair. It's probably more of a problem in the higher areas like where you are is relatively low, with the greatest of respect, compared to like up at the lake, up towards the Golden Downs, where it is problematic higher up rather than down in the low country, and where it's colder. That's where we see it as being more of an issue.
Yes, I understand that.
Mount Richmond Forest Park and that type of area.
Eric
Gordon's
Appleton, Eric pointed out specifically the species that are being promoted to fill in this slot effectively, this higher elevation. It's in his thing here, but my point here is that people who know what they're doing, or this is their specialty. By the way, Eric is a patron of the Farm Forestry Association. They are looking at other trees to fill in this elevation slot, and they're having a lot of success. And this promotional thing is pushing it. I don't think that, and I would also say, as I did in my written, that I think the system is working pretty good in that areas are being identified and dealt with appropriately by people who understand it. There's a good level of communication between the big forestry companies, the nurseries, to improve the situation.
Thank
I don't
you.
think laws will help at this point.
Thank you. Look, thank you. I know we're up to time, but we've got one more. You all right? Okay. Thank you very much for thank you for your interesting presentation. And
Thank you.
people, I mean, we can get in touch with you. You're representing a certain segment of farm forestry.
It's a local branch.
Local branch.
Yes, I'm the secretary of the
We can
local
get-
branch.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, Councillor Benj, are you on Zoom there? Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Do you
Thank you.
do you have anything to say at this point? Welcome to the meeting.
No, I don't. Seemed to me that you weren't aware that I was here. And I couldn't work out how to respond.
True, but I now know you're there. So
Thank you.
we're going to move on now. Seeing we've got couple of submitters here, a little bit early, but so John, are you okay to present now? Yeah. Right, okay. So if you just move up to the red light there. So welcome, and we have 10 minutes, and the bell will go. Will you hear the bell?
Well, hopefully you can wave at me.
All right, so the bell will go at 8 minutes, and then questions before 10 minutes of this time.
Okay, thanks. Okay, thanks for hearing me. I'm John Longden. I'm a resident of Tākaka. I have worked as a field ecologist and pest controller and that kind of stuff during my working years. My partner's a vet, which has some relevance to what I'm going to talk about. I've been a cat owner, but I mostly want to talk about cats. As I see it, from my point of view, there are two major issues. One is the personal and political about nuisance and equity in terms of the current rules, and the other is environment, wildlife particularly. So starting with the smaller issue, cats are not treated the same as dogs in terms of the way they behave around town and the way we manage them. And that is an equity issue. And so, for instance, there's several cats that come into my yard and pee on my tools and poop in my garden, and I can't do anything about it. If it was a possum, I could trap it with a kill trap. If it was a dog, I could call the ranger. But if it's a cat, the only thing I can actually do is something really illegal, which is shoot, shovel, and shut up. And I try to refrain from that kind of behavior, but it's very irritating because these animals are doing, as well as the pooping and the peeing, they're killing birds in my garden and everybody else's garden. And I don't like that. And it's obviously not good for the environment. So there's an equity issue with cats being treated differently to other animals, I believe. And there's certainly some problems, social problems and nuisance problems, even staying away from the environmental issues. But then going on to the broader environmental issues, clearly, if cats are killing birds in private gardens, that's not that great. But we know from quite a lot of research that cats don't stay in their private gardens. In Thames, there was a research project where we tagged a load of cats, including a lot of cats that never left home. And it turned out that they did indeed leave home. They travelled up to 10 kilometres to all sorts of places where they weren't supposed to go. And although we couldn't tell, they were certainly killing things. And the same in Trouncen and Cowrie Park in Northland. They were going up to 10 kilometres into the bush, and these were mostly cats that never left home until we put a radio on them and found out where they were going. When they go into the bush, they kill things. When they go into other people's yards, they kill things. The big issue that really, although this you guys do not have control over feral cat management, but the animals that live in these towns are the pool and the source of the ferals in two ways. One is direct loss. The animals go and get lost or get kicked out of a car on the road. But there's also genetic transfer where these animals that are roaming 5-10 kilometres mate with cats in the wild and add new genes. And this is something very specifically important because you may not be aware, but you can go on the internet and there's a person in Nelson, which is not really relevant specifically, but they're doing it everywhere, breeding cats that are enormous. There's one called a toiger, which is a play on tiger. My vet partner had one in her clinic the other day. It weighed 8.5 kilograms. It wasn't fat. And so that was 2.5 times the size of a normal cat. And this is an active cat. When you buy one, you get this little briefing sheet and it says your cat just needs a lot of stimulation and a lot of activity. Well, nobody ever gives their cat stimulation and activity. What the cats do is get bored and go off and kill things. So this is a monster, you know, and they're legal. And so if it was a dog, we're allowed to own monster dogs because generally speaking, we have to manage them. But cats, we don't. We can have one of these things and we can let it go anywhere. And if it comes in my yard, I'm not even allowed to hit it on the head. So I think we need to upgrade. So to get to the specifics, I believe that we need to be treating cats the way we do dogs. I think they should be microchipped compulsorily. I think they should be registered. I think there should be obligations which are clearly stated about what we can and can't do with our cats. And if the cats are running around and being a nuisance, then there should be the similar consequences to what happened with dogs. They should be impounded. If an owner can't be found or the owner isn't prepared to cough up a pretty decent fine, then the cats should be put down, all the usual stuff. And I think this is very important, especially with these new breeds around. I'm hoping that somebody's going to be doing something about the breeders of these massive cats, but it's unlikely. So that's pretty much my, what I have to say, really. There is a secondary issue about strays and ferals, which is that they're not in good condition. It's actually quite a major ethical issue having strays, ferals, because I've handled them, we've caught them to do radio tracking, and they're in terrible nick. So all these animals that get out and become stray or feral, and there's not much difference really, are in awful shape. They're full of disease and covered, and they live to be barely 2 or 3 years old. So there's a whole lot of reasons why we want to try and reduce the feral and stray population in rural and in urban areas. And this will be a good start, I think, to start treating them like other potentially nuisance animals. So that's me.
Thank you. Any questions? We've got time for Councillor Stella.
Thank you through the chair. Thanks for giving your time, John, today. If I understand you correctly, you were wanting to see cats restricted to the property where they live and some measures that would allow them being impounded if they stray outside of that. Is that what you're asking for?
In Australia, they've been doing this for quite a long time, and they're pretty draconian. They basically look at it from the other side of things. They don't really tell you how to do it. They just tell you if it gets out, we're going to off it. If it gets out, we're going to catch it. And unless you pay a pretty whopping fine, we're going to put it down. So that's how they do it. I would struggle to keep a bloody cat in my house or in my garden. That's the nature of cats. So I think you have to make it the owner's issue by saying what happens if it gets out. And, as I said, I've owned cats. I don't like the idea of killing cats any more than I like the idea of killing stoats, but they're doing terrible things, and so I kill stoats as well. But I don't think I don't think you could specify easily how to keep a cat in. And I think it would be easier to just pass that problem to the owner.
Thank you. Councillor Sensor.
Thanks through the chair. Kia ora, John. Thanks for your submission, your oral and your written. Just looking at your written submission, in terms of what we're kind of really considering for the regional pest management strategy review, I understand that the main thrust is that you're looking for us to extend the, I guess, controls in regards to feral cats wider. Is that kind of the main, that's correct?
Yes, I mean, to be honest, I'm not totally au fait with what the exact rules are, but I'm just aware that there's basically a very different level of management. I'm also aware that this is much more difficult than managing dogs because cats are cats. I don't envy you having to think about all this, but the Australians have done it apparently very successfully and pretty much by being very hard-nosed, setting some rules and then enforcing them.
Thank you. And just a quick question from me that I'm just asked another submitter as well about, are you aware that concurrently we are looking at a bylaw for cats? So we've actually got two parallel processes. One is under the Biosecurity Act, which is focusing on feral cats. The other is a bylaw, TD's Tasman District Council bylaw, which would address the microchipping and the desexing and that side of things. So we've got these two things running at the same time. So it's a bit confusing.
Right, thank you. No, I didn't know, but that's, yeah. Right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Right, thank you.
Okay. Welcome, Charmaine. Are you there? Can you hear us?
I can indeed.
Are you ready? It's a little bit early, but are you ready to go now?
Yes, that's actually really convenient for me because I've taken time out from a short holiday that I'm on, and Buller Council have very kindly allowed me to use one of their offices to Zoom in. So much appreciated if I can go now.
Okay, well, you have 10 minutes. We'll ring the bell at 8 minutes, and if you leave time less than 10 minutes, then that will be time for some questions.
Sure, thank you. Well, tēnā koutou katoa, councillors and Chair Celia. My name is Charmaine Peterite. I'm the co-founder and project manager for the Tākaka Hill Biodiversity Group Trust. First, I'd like to give a bit of context to our submission. We are part of the National Wilding Pine conifer program. We applied in 2020 directly to MPI as part of their Jobs for Nature program, and we received $370,000 to begin the process of controlling wilding pines on the Tākaka Hill management unit. So you may be familiar with the dead and dying pines that are on Tākaka Hill currently, so that's part of our work. Now, some of our funding went to private landowners, $57,000 of our funding. We also controlled wilding pines on TDC's Canaan Road Reserve. TDC Roads Department very kindly funded the traffic management plan. We also invested $64,000 in controlling wilding pines on public conservation land in the Kahurangi and also in Abel Tasman National Park. Nature knows no boundaries, and we regard national parks and the road reserve as being our neighbours, so we undertook to take control of the wilding pines there. Now, most recently, or in this financial year, the government decided to only allocate the money that they had to regional councils, TDC being one of them. No funding was made available for community groups to continue their wilding control on private and also public and TDC land if they're our neighbours, which means that we are now left with being halfway through our wilding control program. So all of this $370,000 that we have invested will eventually come undone unless there is some recourse to commence our program. So our submission primarily is around acknowledging that Council is attempting to take on board this very important issue. The issue of wilding pines is very significant as far as the impact on biodiversity, and we see that as being very important as halting New Zealand's biodiversity decline. I also want to point out that the Trust doesn't also take care of wilding pines. We take a whole of ecosystem approach, so we also have projects like predator control, habitat restoration. So we're about restoring and protecting the unique limestone and marble ecosystems on Tākaka Hill. Our main concern is the inequity around the approach. I only caught a part of the speaker previous to John, which was expressing concern around our private landowners. So while in principle we acknowledge that at first blush seems like a good idea, the reality is that without exception, everybody on Tākaka Hill is unlikely to be able to afford or have the capacity or the capability to control the wilding pines on their property. That's further exacerbated by the fact that most of the pines are legacy pines. So they are either inherited by new landowners who are stuck with these pines, or they small forestry plantations that landowners have also inherited, and they're taking care of those as best they can. But we believe that it is not fair that landowners should bear all of that responsibility, particularly as it's very hard to determine exactly where wilding pines come from. And the other thing is that there are many wilding pines within the TDC road reserve that are still there. And in addition, Waka Kotahi has numerous wilding pines that are basically holding up Tākaka Hill. So it's a bit of a complex issue. And I think it's, once again, great start, but I think that it will need to be approached in a very collaborative way, particularly with the Tākaka Hill Management Unit. I work closely with the National Wilding Pine Network, who have their own issues, but it comes down to funding. And we need to make sure that that is fair and equitable. And I'm hoping you've read the submission, so you'll be across our submission as well. So any questions?
Yes, thank you, Charmaine. We have read the submission. So
Right.
I've got some questions. Councillor Sanson.
Thanks through the chair. Kia ora, Charmaine. Thanks for your submission, both oral and written. So my kind of takeaway, I guess, and I just want to check this with you, is that you are broadly supportive of the direction being proposed in the regional pest management review, but concerned about the impact that this may have on kind of, I guess, private landowners to have to fund the management of wildings. And so you really would want to ensure that there is funding available, that if we adopt these changes, that we are considerate, or that councils are considerate of how private landowners will fund the wilding control. Is that it really?
No, I think your first statement of we broadly support is about where it ends. We acknowledge that wilding pines need to be controlled. I think it would need to be a case-by-case basis, but I would push back a little bit and say to TDC that you also need to be lobbying central government on the continuation of wilding pine programs such as the Tākaka Hill Management Unit, which we use our contractors to deliver, is making that available to us to continue that work. So broadly supportive is about as good as the statement can be made from our perspective, but it's very complex.
Yeah, thanks very much. And thank you for clarifying around the desire for advocacy for ongoing central government funding for wilding pine control.
It appears there are no more questions, Charmaine. So thank you very much for your interesting and helpful submission.
Thank you. I'd just like to finish off by saying we're open to working with council and looking at ways that this the rules and regulations can be made equitable, because I would recommend caution in passing anything in its current state, because we believe that would end up costing council far more to implement some of those rules and regulations than working in a collaborative way with ourselves on Tāpeka Hill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Gillian, welcome. I know you've done this before. So we've got 10 minutes and the bell will go at 8 minutes. And if you keep it short, there'll be time for questions.
I'm here on behalf of Forest and Bird. I'm speaking in support of our written submission. While the cat population has skyrocketed, there are millions of wild cats in the country because of unneutered cats roaming free and copulating widely. Hundreds are shot or trapped each year, adding to the pest burden we have to control. Not only bees pollinate plants, insects, lizards and birds all pollinate while looking for food or moving through foliage, whether butterflies during the day, moths during the night time, beetles, etc. All these creatures have a role to play in keeping nature in balance. They provide ecological services and need protection. Cats kill all these small creatures. Sorry about my voice. The way we deal with climate change is dependent on how we care for the environment, especially forests, wetlands, and coastal areas. If uncontrolled predators, including cats, inhabit all these places, they directly deprive the environment of species which pollinate plants and enable the spread of seeds and fruit. And this leads to the collapse of forests and habitats and the fauna these support. Chipping and registering will ensure that roaming cats can be returned to the owner and non-chipped euthanized. The sooner we make this a legal requirement, the sooner we can get on top of the problem. Owners of all domestic pets must be held responsible for their animals. The ultimate solution is to contain cats, just as all other pets are contained. In Canberra, for instance, new suburbs are designated cat-free. Cats need to be fully contained on the owner's properties, and unchipped cats are assumed to be feral and treated accordingly. Cat feces contain toxoplasmosis, and this parasite can affect people and pass on to a baby during pregnancy. Cats also carry fleas, mites, and worms, and non-cat owners don't want wandering cats on their properties. Forest and Bird strongly supports the proposed bylaw to make microchipping registration and neutering of all cats mandatory, apart from those owned by registered breeders. Thank you.
Thank you, Gillian. I've got one question for you.
Thanks through the chair. Kia ora, Gillian. Thanks for your submission, both your oral and your written one. Both councils are going to be considering a cat management bylaw later in the year. So hopefully you'll be able to resubmit on that as well. But in terms of this process, we have, for the proposed changes, we are looking at some areas where feral cats will be kind of controlled, or it will be, you know, people in the community will be able to control them.
Kill them, you mean?
Are you looking, are you kind of happy with the areas that have been chosen, or are you looking for other areas to be extended? Are there any particular areas that are not included in the proposed control?
Cats travel widely. Doc did an experiment with a cat in Nelson Lakes, and it travelled from the village right up past the head of the lake. And TDC did a similar experiment with cats around the Waimea Inlet. Some cats stayed near their home, some travelled widely, many kilometres in a night. And living in this area, we have so many places that are top-rate environmental places, wetlands, forests, national parks, reserves. Any cats that are left roaming could go to any of those places. And they're canny. They get to know where the birds' nests are and where the birds roost, and they head for them.
Thanks. So you're supportive of extending the area? Okay,
absolutely.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much, Gillian.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Yeah, that actually ends our submissions on cats, and we now move on to the issue of wilding conifers. And we have 3 10-minute slots. So I think the best thing is for us to work through these slots of 10 minutes. And if you can leave a little bit of time at the end of your 10 minutes for questions, and then at the very, very end of the program, then there could be time for more questions at that time. So is Trish here?
My name's Trish Bordeaux, and we're going to do a joint presentation, if that's okay, for forestry companies.
Okay, yes, so is this going to be Trish? I've got 10 minutes each for Trish, Joe Field and Dan Montgomery. So you're proposing to have these in, sorry?
Craig Brown.
And Craig Brown. Oh, sorry, yes, I didn't see his name there. Yeah, all right, okay, well, that's fine. Okay, well, yeah, so you've got 30 minutes, and as I say, that in that case, we'll have the questions at the very end. Are you okay with that? We'll have questions at the end of the 30 minutes, or would you like to have questions in the middle?
It's what suits you. After each person, you might wish to question each one.
rather than wait till 20 minutes.
All right, okay.
Dish them out. Not loud enough. Take it off. Just really want to think.
Okay, so who's going to start?
Okay. My name's Trish Fordyce and I'm here
Oh, just if you could just turn your speaker off if you're not speaking.
on red. You turn it off and you're not speaking. Yeah, off.
Yeah, and just on when you're speaking. Thanks.
The submissions today are for 141 New Zealand Limited, Tasman Pine Forests Limited and PF Olsen Limited. Now, the three companies did provide a joint submission and I understand that that's been read. The only part that we would want to alter at this stage is in paragraph 24 of that submission, where we stated that we know of no afforestation of replanting of Douglas fir or replanting of Douglas fir in the region since the introduction of the NES PF in 2018. And it's come to and it's in our evidence today, is that there has been an application that was approved under the wilding calculation rules for planting of Douglas fir in relationship to a project along with redwoods. So that's the only one that we want to advise. That's a change to paragraph 24 of our original submission. So the companies are all individually represented today, and all persons are available to answer any questions. There is going to be no evidence from PF Olsen, but Marty Kelleher is here today to answer any questions if need be. So given the time constraints, we've actually did take the opportunity to refine the evidence and to focus predominantly on Rule B. Our submission, though, will cover non-compliance with the Biosecurity Act 1993 issues of including existing wildings to Rule B, the National Environmental Standards for Commercial Forestry, inaccurate mapping of Rule C and D areas, and the evidence that's going to be set out. With regard to the non-compliance with the Biosecurity Act, Rule B is a major change to the rules in any pest management plan. Rather than provide specified actions or specified treatments for occupiers of planted forests, the rule proposes that forestry owners are liable for the costs of the removal of wildings on another person's property. The rule applies to existing wildings. The proposal contains a general description of the adverse effects of wildings and a general
cost benefit analysis of costs and benefits. The lack of specified description of the impact of existing and future spread, and here because of Rule B, I'll limit it to Pinus radiata and Douglas fir, from planted forests on the region or any specified part of the region, means that an accurate cost benefit analysis of Rule B and the extent to which any person contributes to the problems proposed to be resolved has not and cannot be undertaken. The council hasn't done it on a specific basis, and we're in no position to provide that either because it's such a general rule. With regard to the potential impact of inaccurate mapping under Rule C and D, the costs of deforestation of existing planted forests have not been included in the cost benefit analysis. Accordingly, we submit that the proposal for Rule B does not comply with the first steps of as set out, and that should be just Section 70 of the Biosecurity Act, and in particular the subsections 2C, Little Roman numeral 1, 7 and 8, 2E, Little Roman numeral 1. And that's the description of the adverse effects and analysis of the benefits and costs of the plans and contributors to the problem and impacts on Waihitapu. The proposal does not acknowledge that the councils contribute to the spread of wildings by their management of existing wildings on road reserves, and there is no acknowledgement that the councils will benefit from passing on the cost to forestry owners. Where there are existing wildings, our evidence will outline the difficulties of proving the lineage of any wilding. The costs of this process on the councils have not been acknowledged or included in the cost benefit analysis. Accordingly, we submit that section, and this should be 72Q, to set out the anticipated costs of implementing the plan is not accurate. The proposal advises that the purpose of the rules is in accordance with section 73(5) H and M, and that's of the Biosecurity Act. We submit that Rule B is not in accordance with these mentioned provisions, and I've set them out particularly just in paragraph 12. The provisions are as follows: requiring the occupier of a place to take specified actions to eradicate or manage the pest, and M is requiring the occupier of a place to carry out specified treatments or procedures to assist in preventing the spread. It's my submission that a rule proposing liability for costs is not one that meets the specified actions and or specified treatments. Rule B is novel, but it's not in accordance with section 73 of the Biosecurity Act 1993. In turning to Rule B itself, the words of the rule capture existing wildings. The evidence to be presented will outline the difficulty of proving lineage where there are existing wildings, and I refer to the evidence of Craig Brown that will be presented. Mr. Brown does advise, and I particularly refer you to paragraph 10 of his evidence, that if Rule B was restricted to adjacent land being clear of wildings at 1 July 2024, and wildings were, after that date, appearing on the cleared land, then it is feasible to prove that wildings must be from the planted forest without the need of genotyping that is, and assuming there is no viable seed present on the site following recent wilding pine control. Pinus radiata seed in the natural environment is considered viable for 4 years following release from the cone. We submit that if the councils are determined to proceed with Rule B, that it should be amended to only apply to wildings that appear on clear land from 1 July 2024. And what I've done below is we've rewritten the Rule B, taking into account how you've actually written Rule A as well, and made sure that it only applies to new infestations of cleared land. Now, with regard to the National Environmental Standard for standards for commercial forestry, there is an impression from reading the proposal that forestry companies are not doing anything with regard to managing the risk of wilding spread. This is not the case. The evidence sets out the contribution of the various companies in the operation of Regulation 79 of the NESCF. Of importance is that the NESCF by Regulation 79 sets out the requirements for calculating risk of wilding spread at afforestation and replanting. In other words, there is no longer any existing use rights for replanting of conifer forests. The councils have all the information about the location and species for afforestation and for replanting. The contribution of the NESCF regulations to managing risks of wilding spread should be acknowledged in this proposal. That's the review proposal. It should be part of the basis of changing Rule B as set out above in my submissions. Another matter that's been referred to in our original submission and will be by way of evidence as well, and it's from Dan Montgomery, will provide example of inaccurate mapping that includes planted production crop. The map should be reviewed and remapped to ensure that planted crop is not included. Any remapping should be undertaken in consultation with the affected tree owner. And so that's the end of my submissions. And today the evidence that will be called will be from Joe Field, who's on my right, from OFO, Craig Brown on my left, immediate left from OFO, and Dan Montgomery from Tasman Pine Forest Limited. And as I said before, Marty Kelleher from PFO is available to answer questions.
Okay, thank you. So you just move on. And
yeah. Oh, is there a question?
Yes. Can you wait till the end?
Thank you. I introduce Joe Field to you.
And if you could just turn off your microphone, thank you. Good, Joe.
My name is Joe Field and I'm the Environment Manager for 141 New Zealand. I have a Bachelor in Natural Environment Wilderness Studies from the University of Tasmania, Australia, and I've been involved in the forest industry for 24 years. My current position is Environment Management Manager at OFO, which involves responsibilities for supporting the business environmental leadership through continual improvement, ensure legislative compliance, create and maintain strong relationships with regulatory bodies, stakeholders and the community, and maintain Forest Stewardship Council FSC certification. I represent OFO on the New Zealand Forest Owners Association Environment Committee, and I recently have obtained qualifications to be a lead auditor in general and additional auditor qualifications in FSC plantation forest management. The evidence to cover on the following matters will be review of the adjacent regional pest management plans, review of the Tasman and Nelson Council's documents relating to the described impacts, issues with the process proposed by Rule B, and issues with neighbours. So in respects to adjacent regional council plans, I've reviewed Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and the West Coast regional pest management plans. None have a rule like Rule B, which passes on the legal obligation of the cost of removal of legacy issues from one landowner to an adjacent landowner. Rule B is a new approach in regional pest management plans. Accordingly, there are no other plans that may provide guidance as to the workability of the proposed Rule B. Workability to me means rules that are fair, reasonable, and able to be enforced. The concern that there is going to be major planting of forestry in these regions, Nelson, Tasman, is not founded on fact. Rather, it's unsupported supposition. The information from FOA's Facts and Figures 2022-23 on New Zealand plantation forest industry indicates that the region of Nelson Marlborough there has been limited increase in commercial forestry between 2019 and 2022. The councils have the information available to check on this, as afforestation notices must be provided to them. From November 2023, notification must also include carbon forests. With respects to review of council documents relating to impacts, I have reviewed the council documents to understand if the description in this proposed plan of the impacts of wilding conifers is an issue in the two regions. I understand that the operational areas are established after consideration of the impacts of wilding conifers. The Mount Richmond Management Area clearly identifies impacts on iconic grasslands and ultramafic areas and outstanding landscape areas from wilding conifers. My concern, however, is with Rule B. I can find no council documents that identifies, outside of the operational areas, issues of impact on native ecosystems, recreational and landscape values, pastoral farming areas, any impact on water availability and impact on Tanata whenua values, let alone that there is an issue of wildfire risk. When introducing a rule such as Rule B, I would expect specific justification identifying a specific risk that requires an intervention as proposed by Rule B. It concerns me that the generic approach set out in the general issue description is compounded using the cost-benefit analysis, using the information and assumptions set out in MPI's Superior report. In other words, this proposed Rule B is not related to any specific area, allowing such a specific area being able to be assessed as to whether the cost benefits in the Tasman and Nelson area are justified or not. With respects to issues proposed in the process under Rule B, as Rule B appears to apply to existing wildings, I have concerns as to the enforceability of the rule. Evidence from Craig Brown outlines the improbability of scientifically identifying lineage in wildings. The process set out in Rule B is not like processes of checks and balances under the Resource Management Act. The process for Rule B does not set out the criteria for valid complaint, the criteria that would form part of any scientific information that an authorised person would rely on, and there is no third-party process for a forestry company to object to any information provided by an authorised person. Of very real concern, there is no incentive for any neighbour to reach an agreement with a forestry owner. This would include councils themselves who have existing wildings on their road reserves. Given the lack of certainty of identified areas of risk, the issues of scientific proof and a process that provides no checks and balances, I find it difficult to understand how an appropriate cost-benefit analysis can be undertaken of the proposed rule. I would support the changes to Rule B as set out in Trish Fordyce's submission. Finally, issues with neighbours. In July 2023, 141 was approached about a potential at-risk wilding pines within Tasman Council's road reserves. Council presented their opinion of the pines being OFO trees, therefore they were OFO's problems. OFO advised the council that the trees were on their land, council land, and no provenance testing was carried out, as well as some of the identified trees not being Pinus radiata or Doug fir. While OFO provided a joint solution where both parties could contribute to removing the at-risk trees, council still has not responded to this day. This example in dealing with Tasman District Council raises the concern that OFO could find it difficult to reach an agreement with the council when dealing with wilding conifers on council land. The National Environment Standards for Commercial Forestry have requirements that provide obligations on commercial forestry businesses to manage the risk of wilding spread, and this should be recognised as part of the actions to manage risk under the proposed plan. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Craig Brandt. I have a Bachelor of Forestry Science from Canterbury University, and I've worked for both the Department of Conservation and 141 in the forest industry for 14 years. My current position is Forestry Manager, and it includes responsibilities for how we grow the forest. That is land preparation, establishment, silviculture, tending, and protection, which includes fire management and pest control. Establishment work involves the use of the wilding calculator for replanting under the National Environmental Standards for Commercial Forestry, and pest control includes the control of wilding pines. 141 is a shareholder in the Radiata Pine Breeding Company, or RPBC. I am 141's technical representative to the RPBC. The RPBC has mapped the Pinus radiata genome. As a representative, I have maintained my knowledge of Pinus radiata genetics and genotyping. My evidence will cover the IFO establishment program, the use of the wilding calculator, science to identify wilding conifer lineage, known issues of spread of Pinus radiata, contribution of 141 to wilding conifer control, and replacement of Rule B. In regards to IFO's establishment program, IFO is replanting approximately 2,000 hectares each year of its plantation forest. Any Pseudosurgum ensesii or Douglas fir stands are being replaced with Pinus radiata. Other than a block with redwood, I know of no planting of Douglas fir in this region. To be a permitted activity, any afforestation and replanting with Douglas fir would have to comply with the criteria of the wilding calculator. If the requirements are not met, then a resource consent would have to be applied for. For the use of the wilding calculator, under Regulation 79 of the NSCF, any replanting as a permitted activity with a conifer species must be calculated in accordance with wilding tree risk guidelines by a suitably competent person, no more than 8 months before replanting is carried out. I am, as such, a competent person, and I'm involved in the wilding calculation process for 141. The regulation information requirements must be forwarded to the relevant regional council. Regulation 79 has other requirements to remove wildings from wetlands and significant natural areas prior to any replanting. A follow-up requirement at 5 years is also imposed. 141 treats its Indigenous conservation areas as the same status as significant natural areas, even though they are not recorded as such by the Tasman District Council. To date, 141 is spending approximately $51,000 a year to meet this requirement. Under the National Environmental Standards for Commercial Forestry, 141 must also supply the councils on request a replanting management plan. The management plan requirements are set out in Schedule 3 and include a clause requiring a schedule for wilding conifer inspections and show removals will be undertaken in wetlands and significant natural areas. With regards to the science of identifying wilding conifer lineage, if Rule B applies to existing wilding conifers on land adjacent to planted forests, it is nearly impossible to prove where a wilding seedling came from. The radiata genome has been mapped, so genomics can be used to find markers or mutations that can indicate a high probability of the sample's lineage. Aside from high cost, the technology could not be used to prove direct lineage of an individual. For example, there are a number of common parents in New Zealand. Within the 141 estate, 9% of our crop is from the parent 875242. So it is widespread. So even if a wilding was tested and had a known parental lineage, there will be numerous potential parents sharing the same lineage across New Zealand and across the estate. This is likened to COVID testing that use genomics to show different strains of COVID. Scientists could show that two people had the same strain, but they could not show who actually transmitted the infection if the strain was widespread in the community. It is not a science if an authorised person assumes that wildings adjacent to a planted forest originated from that forest. Where there are wildings on adjacent land, spread of those conifers could be from the existing wildings. If Rule B was restricted to adjacent land being clear of wildings as at 1 July 2024, and wildings were after that date appearing on that clear land, then it is feasible to prove that wildings must be from the plantation forest without the needs of genotyping, assuming there is no viable seed already present on the site, following, for example, following recent wilding pine control. Pinus radiata seed in the natural environment is considered viable for 4 years after release from the cone. With regards to known issues of spread of Pinus radiata, while 141 has legacy spread of Douglas fir and other minor conifer species, it has little boundary issues for the spread of Pinus radiata. Rather than a general rule such as Rule B, IFO would prefer to work with the councils to understand the boundary issues that are of concern. Moving forward, the NSCF wilding calculation is ensuring that there are few, if any, permitted activity allowing the replant of Douglas fir. Contributions of 141 to wilding conifer control. On our property, on the 141 properties in compliance with the NSCF, 141 removes wildings from wetlands and significant natural areas. Outside of its properties, 141 has contributed to the Mount Richmond Wilding Conifer Management Unit. The contribution was by way of a condition from an Overseas Investment Office approval. IFO also has some agreements with the Department of Conservation to contribute to wilding conifer on Department of Conservation land. It is my understanding that radiata is not identified as a major spreader with regards to these programs, and that 141 has contributed to. Finally, with regards to replacement of Rule B, given the issues of scientific proof, I'm of the opinion that Rule B could be amended to include a starting state of clear land to read as follows. From 1st July 2024, occupiers of planted coniferous forests greater than 1 hectare outside of named wilding operational areas are liable for the cost of removal of any new wilding conifers present on adjoining land that is clear of any infestation of wilding conifers. The requirement is limited to adjoining land within 200 metres of the planted forest boundary. This requirement will be on written direction from an authorised person following a valid complaint from the adjoining affected neighbour, and where there is evidence, in the opinion of an authorised person, that wilding spread has occurred from the planted forest to an adjoining property. That's the end of my evidence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kia ora, my name is Dan Montgomery. I have a Bachelor of Forestry Science from the University of Canterbury and have been involved in the forest industry for 9 years. My current position is Technical and Environmental Forester for Tasman Pine Forest, which involves responsibilities for maintaining and enhancing our environmental and resourcing performance. That is, ensuring the protection and enhancement of non-production terrestrial and aquatic environments, ensuring compliance with local and central government rules, maintaining Forest Stewardship Council certification, managing Tasman Pine's tree measurement program, and trialling new technologies where appropriate. I represent Tasman Pine on the Environment Committee of the New Zealand Forest Owners Association. I'm an active member of the New Zealand Institute of Forestry and a forestry representative on the working group of the Mount Richmond Wilding Conifer Management Unit. My evidence today will cover the following matters. So look at our Tasman Pines estate and replanting program, the NSCF and the use of the wilding calculator, Rule B and Rules D and E regarding their inaccurate mapping. So Tasman Pine owns 35,500 hectares of forestry in the Tasman, Nelson and Marlborough regions. 25,735 hectares are in productive forest, with only 277 hectares in Douglas fir, which is about 0.8%. Some of our estate backs onto the Mount Richmond Forest Park, and some of the estate surrounds or is surrounded by other plantation forests. Tasman pine has well over 1,000 neighbours and kilometres of roads where our neighbours are the Tasman District, Nelson City or NZTA. Tasman pine are replanting approximately 700 to 800 hectares of its estate each year as part of our sustainable forest modelling. Douglas fir is not being replanted and is being replaced with radiata pine or retired in uneconomic or high environmental risk areas. Tasman pine spends tens of thousands annually on controlling wildings on its own estate and with some of its neighbours. Furthermore, by not replanting Douglas fir, Tasman pine is essentially paying to get rid of the risk of the spread of Douglas fir. Regarding the NESCF and the use of the wilding calculator, the National Environmental Standards Commercial Forestry Wilding Calculator calculates the spread of risk of conifers. The only planting of Douglas fir that I know of is associated with redwood forest, which has been mentioned previously. And that there's a bit of an error there, I should say, without resource consent. It is my opinion that the calculator is working well and deals with the risk of spread from replanting afforestation of conifers. Through my involvement with the working group for the Mount Richmond Wilding Management Unit, it's my understanding that the main concern is eradicating contorta and Douglas fir. I've been involved in various meetings with council staff and contractors in the development of these rules. Regarding the new approach to Rule B, I had expected that, like Rule A, the councils would have been able to identify areas of concern outside the named operation areas. Given the shrinking plantation of Douglas fir and the advent of the wilding calculator, areas where planting of Douglas fir poses a high risk of adverse impact should be able to be identified. That is, risks to identified outstanding landscapes, SNAs and cultural sites should be able to be assessed. While I understand the risk of spread from Douglas fir, the risk of spread from radiata pine since the introduction of the National Environmental Standards plantation forest, which is now commercial forest, is not one that I've observed. I was surprised at Rule B being so broad and including existing wildings. Tasman pine has neighbours with aged wildings on their land that they do not want removed. We have kilometres of neighbouring roads with aged wildings that are not being controlled. We have no control over neighbours and how they manage their land. Some of our forests are adjacent to other plantation forests, and to now be responsible for a legacy issue is not fair or reasonable. This unreasonableness is amplified given the genetic issues and the costs of trying to prove the lineage of wildings. If a neighbour has controlled wildings in their property, it will be nearly impossible to identify the lineage of that wilding. I would support Rule B being applicable to new wilding spread on clear land. The forest companies could work with the councils to identify areas of risk, and these could be mapped out. The risk would be related to council's generic description of impacts, but targeted to specific areas, and an appropriate cost-benefit analysis could be undertaken. Regarding the inaccurate mapping relating to rules D and E, I have concerns about the mapping quality applicable to these rules. On my submission there is a map showing the Takaka Hill Community Project, which is in purple, and our Tasman Pine Estate, which is in black. Enforcing rules D and E on inaccurate mapping would force Tasman Pine to have deforestation liabilities under the ETS scheme, and valuable assets would be taken out of production and converted to weed nurseries. Maps 4.1, 4.2, 4.31 and 4.32 should be remapped with consultation of neighbouring landowners. Alternatively, if this does not happen, then the rules should not apply to areas of plantation forests included in such maps. Finally, I support the changes to Rule B as set out in the submission of Trish Fordyce for new infestations of clearland. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So we'll move into questions. So who'd like to go first? All right, Councillor Simpson.
And thanks through the chair. Kia ora. Review. Thanks very much for your submissions. I've got 3 questions. One is, 2 are probably in relation to the oral submission, which are also written, and 1 to the written submission, which we have in our pack. And it, in the written submission, there is a I guess a small paragraph that says in the SAPIR report with regard to availability of water, this region does not include a hydro catchment that may be impacted. And I'm just wanting to understand, is hydro catchment just meaning water catchment, or is it for hydroelectricity? I'm just...
I can answer to start with. In the SAPIR report, it refers to your cost benefit and your values with regard to hydro catchments. That report does not include any such catchments relating to Nelson and or Tasman.
Okay, so the report doesn't include those catchments. Just because I'm aware that we have the Maitai and the Roding, and I guess now also the Waimea Dam, which are all significant. They're major water catchments for a region.
No, I
so
understand that, but the cost benefit assumptions and values that this councils have used in their own cost benefit analysis refers to the SAPIR report's figures.
Okay.
And my only comment there is that report does not include this region or these regions as having those values.
Sure. And then I had a question around, there was a comment made around Douglas fir that has been replanted under a resource consent. And I'm just wondering, do you have any information about the area that was replanted? Like what size area was replanted and where in the region that is?
And it wasn't a resource consent. Sorry, I think we made that clear in the end. We've been advised that it was permitted by way of the wilding calculation, but Margie can answer the rest.
So I'm curious then, so forget the comment about the resource consent, just where it is and what area was replanted?
Thanks. It's in above the Tadmore Valley, next to the Donald Creek area, if you're aware of that. Up in there.
Donald Creek. Okay. And yeah, I've got that. And what area? Do you know how many hectares was replanted in Douglas?
15 hectares. It's a nursery crop with redwoods.
Yeah. Thanks. And then the final question is, there's in terms of Rule B, it seems that the main position is that if Rule B is to be adopted, you'd kind of like it to be starting from, the date that the joint, that this strategy comes into effect. So kind of like no liability for anything prior to the 1st of July, but liability going forwards. Yeah. Okay. And so then for, I guess, legacy, I think the term is legacy, wilding pines, given that they need to be, if they are deemed to be an issue, somebody needs to kind of, I guess, deal with those. Would you then be suggesting that that falls on the councils to do that, so onto the community ratepayers?
I think a little bit like the Takaka Hill submission for their management unit, that it's a complex situation, and we think the legacy situation needs to be worked through, and a proper cost benefit analysis given of what it would cost the councils to try and prove lineage, when we know that that's really expensive and difficult to prove. And it's something that should be worked with all the parties, including government, as to how to deal with the legacy situation.
Thanks. So just one point of clarification, like proving lineage, that's the first time I've heard that kind of terminology before. Is that something which is usually like that is normal when dealing with wilding pine trees? I guess pines, conifers, wilding conifers?
Not to my knowledge. It's really used for breeding. So to breed through trees, you want to know what the parents are.
Yeah.
So it's used in tree breeding with
Sure.
red-out pine, but it's only probably in the last 5 years that the genome of red-out pine's been mapped and that we're able to use those technologies.
Right, but it hasn't traditionally been used for identifying.
No, it's not bad technology.
No, and the reason it hasn't been used is the legacy issue has been considered as an overall issue for everyone. It has not been said that a particular landowner is going to be legally responsible for the costs of removing them. And it's that now that's focused everybody on how would you prove this? And so that's why it's been raised and why we brought Craig along for his expertise in this area.
Councillor Kilmarnock.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you all of you for a very professional, thorough, thought out presentation. I'm very, very impressed by it all. I've got a couple of questions. Rule B, the change you want, is limiting to adjoining land within 200 metres of a planted forestry. Can you give me a heads up where the 200 metres came from?
Comes from the existing Rule B, the proposed Rule B. It already includes the 200 metres. All we've done in the changes to that rule is with the reference to the clear land and the new spread after the 1st of July. So the 200 metres is in the proposed rule as it stands.
And then my second question, thank you, Trish. The second question is, with the proposed changes you've got, does that now comply with the section 73 of the Biosecurity Act? Probably not, I'd say, but
Probably not. I'm in a position where I can give advice, but I have technical advisors, and they are also the companies that operate in this region. And their advice back to me was that for moving forward, this could be a way of assisting everybody moving forward. And that's why there's been that proposal. I think you are still in breach. I've no doubt that your advisors might be able to find a way of words around that. But that I can give all the advice in the world, but the technical advice to me has been that this, if you altered this rule, it could work.
Deputy Mayor Brian.
Thank you all for your presentation this morning. Just 2 or 3 questions from myself. Just firstly, in relation to how long active seeds are. We've heard a couple of 3 times that pine's active for 4 years. How long is Douglas seed active for? Understand it's a little bit longer than that.
I've heard both. I've heard that being smaller seed, it's not as viable for as long. I've also heard that it lasts longer because you can see seedlings pop up longer. So I wouldn't know to put a number on it. I'd say it is slow to germinate and it can stay dormant for longer. but for how long, I'm not sure.
Right, and of course it can spread further than pine as well, I understand, particularly in the higher environments. And I guess that's where some of our concern is, like adjoining, and I think it was in one of your submissions, adjoining the Mount Richmond National Park. And that leads to my Forest Park, sorry, around the date of 2024 July. What happens, like there's already quite a number of plantings there now that we know will be seeding. So what was the catalyst for July 2024? Wouldn't it, you thought you'd have gone back a little bit, a number of years?
Well, the July 2024 was when the proposed rules were coming in, so it was the date we chose to start. But again, it's that issue of legacy.
Yeah, you see the point I'm making though, but going forward from July 24, that could happen, and it could have happened a week before July 24 or several years.
Yeah, that's correct. In your example, you're talking about wildings, seeding wildings as well. So, I mean, who's responsible for controlling those if you've got those wildings that are coning and seeding? So you have to draw a line, a date somewhere, don't you? You know,
it's like drawing lines on maps and dates, and there's always overs and unders. And then just secondly, in relation to Joe's evidence, your evidence, she talked about in paragraph 13 around a situation with TDC, but I'd suggest to you that a lot of, and it's not your fault personally, but because you've taken over the forest for others, but a lot of plantings are on road reserves and quite close to actual physical roads, and quite often through this process, through other council process, we've asked 141 to remove trees back from the roads, particularly form roads, and have had no response. And obviously, there's lots of legacy plantings where you've planted full road reserves, paper roads and stuff like that. Who would be responsible for those trees that are included in your forest?
Are you saying these trees are on
road reserves?
Within council or NZTA road reserves?
Paper roads, form roads, both.
Right.
Not NZTA roads so much.
Not NZTA. Yeah.
Okay, I can answer part of that. With regard to paper roads, I think there's a whole issue with, you know, you let people graze paper roads, you let people plant paper roads. And so I think that that's kind of a moot issue for this one. With regard to setbacks, the NESPF in 1918 and then CF has the setback areas, and they're probably more than the 10 metres. It's usually 10 metres from a boundary, and a boundary would also include a road boundary, except in the case of icing. And then there is a different ruling for that with regard to the timing of icing in the middle of the year, etc. But that's a greater setback. So basically it's a 10-metre setback that's required to anybody's boundary, road or otherwise.
Right, and that doesn't always happen because we're well aware of plantings where it's right up to the road edge or close to it. And I also, have you taken into consideration the Tasman Resource Management Plan rules around planting setbacks?
That's under the RMA, under the NESCF has the planting setbacks.
Right.
And that rule can only be extended or become more stringent if it related to a regional council rule, but the planting setbacks are generally related to a district council function rule, and so your plans can't be extend that setback.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, so I just do still wonder about this issue of particularly old trees on paper roads, and I'm well aware of some of those.
But to me, if that was an issue, again, it comes back to our problem is that we've found no reports that state that that is an issue in your regions, and we've got mapping and of all the paper roads, of which we could then do a cost benefit analysis and just see if there's a real problem of spread, whether it's from the inside of the forest or the edge of the forest or whatever. And that probably goes back to Joe's evidence of we're looking at if you're going to bring in such a change rule as rule B is, that we would have expected identified issues to be put out there in the public, of which we could then all assess.
I guess some of the issue is that we're at a unitary council, so we have responsibilities for both regional and district levels.
Yeah, I understand that, but your plans are pretty clear as to what goes under a district council function, what goes under a regional council function. Your plans are pretty clear.
Thank you.
Just another comment on roadside plantings there. I think Charmaine mentioned it in her speech as well. But there are times where it gets pretty complicated pretty quickly, and putting hard rules on some of those areas could be quite detrimental to infrastructure. So an example is we're harvesting up on the Takaka Hill at the moment, and there's some large Douglas fir in the NZTA road margin. Yeah, and we said, hey, look, we can work with you, and while we've got road control, we can take some of these, and they didn't want a bar of it because those trees are holding the road up. So without those trees there, the road would disappear. So it gets pretty, and on top of that, if you start poisoning, I mean, you have to fell trees. If you start poisoning trees, you can't do them within basically 2 tree lengths of the road, because you'll forever have things falling down on the road. So yeah, it can get quite tricky.
I've just got one question myself first, and that is that there was a reference to a legacy Douglas fir forest being retired as uneconomic. What does retired mean? What do you do when you retire a forest?
So for us at Tasman Pine, I can only speak on our behalf. If we've been tidying up a lot of the legacy issues in the state, so if we, what we'll do is we'll harvest these areas, and they're generally difficult logging, big trees because they've been left behind because they're too difficult. And if we can harvest it and make money and not have a detrimental impact on the environment, then we'll replant it, because why wouldn't you? But if one of the former is true, and we had issues, then we'll retire it, and we'll either put it into native or a long-term species or something else. So we're doing the same thing for Douglas fir, because a lot of Douglas fir was planted on the nastiest land. So as we harvest it, we make a decision as to whether it's economic and environmentally friendly to replant.
So retirement means removing the trees as part of that retirement process.
If it's retired, then it's taken out of production, yep, and probably put into native or something like that. But whether that's actively or passively is another thing.
And I'll just add on that there are carbon liabilities for these areas. So anything over 2 hectares that's been retired, i.e. removed from a forest cover type, we need to get a pest weeds exemption from the Ministry of from MPI. So which we've had to do in certain cases. So when we retire, we poison those trees to allow an understory of native or other species to come through. But yes, you're right. Retiring means removing the live trees.
Thank you. Councillor Stan. Oh, sorry.
It's all right. No, it's fine. Comment? I was just going to add that we have been actively working with Nelson City Council to retire next to significant areas, ecologically significant, and working with them to identify, and then again working with them to remove. So, yeah.
Thank you. That answers my question. Councillor Stallard.
Thank you, Chair Butler, and thank you all for giving your time today. It's really appreciated. I have 3 questions. The first is around lineage, which is a fascinating and complex topic. Craig, in your submission in point 10, you state that if sort of wildlings grow after the 1st of July of this year on cleared ground within close to an existing forest, you say it'd be feasible, or perhaps you mean reasonable, to prove or that they're from that forest without needing genotyping and so on. How would you approach the fact on 1st of July, if there are seedlings that you can judge by the size, they're probably 1 year old, 2 years old, 5 years old? What would you make of that? You would also assume they're from the forest, or not so clear?
Yeah, that's the second part of point 10, where it says if there's no viable seed present. So that would be a challenge, that if there was a seed source already on that clear land at the 1st of July, those trees could come up, and it wouldn't be clear if they were plantation trees or from that seed source that was already existing on the site. But the point there is, if it's already clear land with no seed source, and we're getting seeding coming off of plantation forest, then I think there would be evidence would accept that it's come from the plantation forest. So it's assuming a situation where there is no seed source and there's no legacy wildings on that land.
Okay, and as a follow-up, we've heard that genotyping is expensive. What's involved in assessing whether there are seeds present on the site? Is that easy or difficult, expensive, or?
I'm not sure how you would do it. It's really, was there a source of trees prior? Were there existing wildings that have been removed? So if there have been legacy wildings, then chances are they've left a seed source. If it's a site where there were no wildings to start with, then there's no trees there that could create a seed source. Yeah.
Yes, and if I could just follow up again, just because I'm really keen to understand your attitude towards legacy trees. So if that area that we're still talking about hadn't previously been planted, so there's in all likelihood there are no seeds in the ground, and it met all those other conditions, it was clear land. So what would your attitude be to those wildings that are, say, 1 or 2 or 5 years old? And you think, okay, they're definitely from the forest, let's assume we know that. Would you still be open to the forestry company taking responsibility for them, or not? Do you still see it as a separate issue, any legacy wildings that need to be discussed further before taking responsibility?
We accepted with that redrafting of the rule that we, the forest companies, would be responsible for the costs of the removal within that 200 metres. And that was the question asked as to whether that would fall within the Biosecurity Act or not. But in drafting that rule, we've accepted that the responsibility would be on the forest company.
For legacy plants as well?
No, not for legacy. This is for new seedlings coming up on cleared land, or that land that is clear doesn't have wildings. That's the way that we've rewritten Rule B.
Okay, and even if there were wildings that were established on the land prior to 1st of July, if there were genotyping that proved the lineage to the existing forest, would you still take responsibility for that, or you still think it's a wider issue?
We have the wider issue of actually how you go through that proof, and it hasn't had a cost benefit analysis for this introduction of the rule. We'd have to have a look at that.
Okay, thank you. And it's been a really interesting sort of conversation about risk and responsibility, kind of the two sides of the coin. And it sounds like you're doing great work with that risk calculator. Under the National Environmental Standards, if I understand correctly from what you've said, I'm not so familiar with that standard, is there some responsibility for the forestry owner if the wildings are an adjacent land that is a significant national SNA or a wetland, or is that not the case? Is there any responsibility under that legislation?
No, under that legislation, it's for any wildings that are within the property or adjacent property owned by the same owner, and for wetlands and SNAs. So it's only within the forest company's property, or if they own the adjoining property as well.
Okay, thank you. And finally, so we've heard you talk about what's fair and reasonable and the expenses and so on. Have you done any work, and you don't have to answer this, on estimating the cost of control for legacy wildings within 200 metres of your forests. So if Rule B were to cover all legacy within 200 metres of your forests and they could be reasonably proved to lineage, have you done any other estimates? Because that's of interest, even if it's the responsibility is not yours, it's someone's. How are we going to deal with this? Do you have any estimates?
It is really case by case. It depends if it, is it a carpet of small seedlings which are really slow to remove, or is it single scattered mature trees which are easy to drill and fill? So it's really case by case. So the costs vary for the operations we've done. The costs do vary quite widely.
And if you were to just arm waving, hazarding a guess for the region, would it be millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions?
Since the introduction of the National Environmental Standards in 2018, our business has spent $1.4 million on wilding control, which includes the overseas investment, office funds, some work on neighbouring properties, and our own work on our own land. And I would estimate we've done possibly 3,000 hectares of work. So whatever that average is, to give you an idea.
So sorry, was that 1.5 million?
1.4 million.
For 3,000 hectares?
Yeah, the 3,000 is a real estimate.
High intensity areas, I guess.
Yeah, and Dan's comment is that's high intensity areas. Yes, that was a risk-based approach, so your highest risk areas targeted.
And let's say in the best case scenario, and finally, if there were quite an intensive area of wildings, would there be any return from actually harvesting them and using them to offset the costs? Or is that just not practical because when you do operations like that, all the infrastructure and so on and the resource consents, it just means we wouldn't go there?
So yes, we have done that. There's a case in the Motueka Gorge where the Department of Conservation had a Douglas fir wilding area that was harvested with P.F. Olson's as a means to removing those wildings. It was harvested, and it's done in other regions as well. So again, case by case, if it's feasible, if there's something actionable, then that's a good way to clear it.
I haven't had any indication from Councillor Benj. Do you have any questions? No. Okay. Well, I would say that this is I'm sure we all agree, this is a very difficult topic that we're embarking on. And thank you for all your work, and thank you for your constructive work as well. That's really, really very helpful to us. So I'm sure that the committee would agree with that. So we have to go away now and decide what we're going to do and what our next steps are going to be. But thank you very much for giving us, your time and helping out in this way.
Well, the Department of Conservation were down as a submitter. They didn't.
Oh, sorry, they weren't.
Right. Right. It's good to know. Okay. Thank you.
If the so we've just Councillor Sanson would like to ask a question of the officers, but if you have any information now for us about what our next steps are going to be, and if you have any reflections that are urgent to give us before we move on to deliberations, then feel free to do that now. And so I'll just
Should be doing that in an open meeting though. Yeah.
I think normally we would ask this, like I've got just a very general question. I think
Okay,
it would be
right.
appropriate
It's
to
not
ask it.
specific.
No.
That should be fine.
it's just about process. I think that's would be a process question.
Yeah. So if officers are able to answer it, that would be great. But I'm really interested in any kind of, I guess, maybe legal advice or guidance being included in the deliberations report around some of the matters that have been raised, particularly in the last 3 submissions. So I don't need it now, but if we could have some guidance to help us distill the information that we have been presented with from the submitters in the context of what we're proposing, just so that if we decide to proceed with the proposed changes as we've proposed them, you know, what our kind of standing is in that way.
Yes, so we've already had some technical advice from MPI around the submission for the deliberation, so we haven't given that to you yet. And we can also do you want us to take the specific things they've raised in their submissions back to our legal team and have a very specific reply?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, they're pertinent matters that we need to consider. Thanks.
Yeah.
If that's
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of this hearing schedule. So I will close the meeting. Yeah, so is somebody willing to move that we receive and consider the submissions? I would just ask whether the 18th of June, you know, just to continue on with process, Winnie, whether the 18th of June is going to be too short for you. I mean, I just am a bit concerned about having that date up there.
It's the only hold up would be the legal team. So we've been working in the background on our deliberations report anyway, so from staff point of view, but the legal team may want some more time.
I think so. I think to put that date on it is move. So Councillor Sanson, happy to move.
Can I ask a quick question of staff and process? After the deliberations meeting, are we making a decision to the 2 councils, and are the timeframes all fine in terms of when the plan or the changes might become operational?
So do you mean that we go from the deliberations and that will go to a recommendation to both councils? Those, I don't think those 2 meetings are booked in. So it may put it off a little bit, but I think it would be okay. Yeah. So does that answer your question? So we go from deliberations and then give the recommendation to the 2 separate councils to adopt?
Yes. Are we under any obligation to make the revised plan live on the 1st of July?
No.
So we just do it in sequence and okay, thank you.
Correct. it carries on. We'd really like to keep it within this year, but also do it correctly.
Councillor Benj, do you have a question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Regarding what the last two councillors were saying about legal advice and so forth, it's quite hard for us. I mean, there were lawyers sitting there with all the resource they had behind them, but the only actual point that they brought up about responsibility was proving lineage and saying it was too costly. So I would suspect that they're not coming from a very strong position. And you've just asked your team to look into that. I think it's quite important that we do know how strong that position is, because as Councillor Stallard, when he questioned, well, what about 1 year ago, plants that are 1 year old, 4 year old, 5 year old? Because if you take all those trees away, or there's no trees there on the 1st of June, or whatever the date was, they're saying they would accept responsibility for trees that got there afterwards. Well, that point in itself, legally, I think, means they would have to accept responsibilities for the ones that were 1, 2, 3 and 5 year olds as well. So I don't think they're sitting on very strong ground there. Now, I don't know whether it's fair at the same time to make them responsible for all that stuff. But the answer to Rachel's question of, what is the legal opinion? I think it's really, really important. That's it, really, from me.
Yeah, thank you. So all this is yet to happen in our deliberations process. So we don't need to actually start to look at that at this moment, and staff will come back to us with that analysis, which we will participate in as well.
Because I think if there was ever another tree present, and in most cases there will have been, it will be harder to prove that it didn't come from a tree that was there before than a tree that is there now. It's a minefield.
Yes, that's right. So I think this is, as I've just said, that considerations that you have had. Well, you'll have the opportunity to to discuss that when we come to deliberations.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you, and thank you for declaring your interest in that. So this has been moved and seconded, and all those in favour? Aye. Carried. So we can now close this meeting with a karakia.
Yeah. Okay. So closing karakia. Kia hiki te kōrero, kia wātia, kia mama te manawa o te tangata. Kia u ki te ara mō tātou e ora nei. Ko rongo ki runga, kia tina. Hui e, tai ki e. Let the discussions be lifted, clear away and ease the hearts of people, keep focus on the path of life. Peace is upheld, say yes, bind together, and so it is.